All right. Welcome everyone. We're going to get started now. Is everyone ready? Are we good? Okay. Thank you. I think it is just about 9 o'clock. Can anyone confirm, is it 9 o'clock yet? Yes? Okay. 9:02. All right, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this panel. My name is Shelley Rude-Wernick. I work for the Jewish Federations of North America in our Center on Aging, Trauma, and Holocaust Survivor Care. And I am so pleased that all of you have joined this session here today on the last day of the General Assembly. Thank you very much for coming here. You can applaud for that, yes. You've made a choice to come to this session because it's so important to gain the strategies to support yourself and your colleagues during this challenging time. It's been a heavy conference, and it's been a heavy year, and no one knows that better than you. We've faced sadness and desperation, and we've seen resilience and unity. We grapple with the daily paradox of the existential and the mundane. On one moment, we might be planning an October 7th remembrance event, or speaking with a reporter about graffiti at a local school. And then the next, arguing with our insurance company over an erroneous bill. Right? You all know the feeling, the mundane and the existential. And we hold the stress of this paradox every day as we go about our work, every day with our colleagues, and every day with our families and our communities. And sometimes it can feel quite overwhelming. I've had friends in Jewish organizations ask, is anyone else thinking of leaving the space? It's getting to be too much. I've seen articles about the impossible pace of our work. And we're here in this session to talk about just that, to talk about the trauma that we're dealing with, that we see on the news, that we feel in our communities, that we remember from our historical memory. We're here to talk about what that means and how it impacts ourselves and our ability to do this important work, both as professionals as well as lay leaders. We're here to discuss strategies to address the burnout that so many are feeling, for both ourselves and for our colleagues. And as the leader of Federation's work on aging, trauma, and Holocaust survivor care, I often say that everything we know and everything we've learned from Holocaust survivors. And this moment is no different. By working with Holocaust survivors over decades and by supporting hundreds of organizations and their work with survivors and learning from what everyone else is learning, we've developed the person-centered, trauma-informed approach, which is a lens or a framework through which we can continue to do our work successfully. We can lead programs for our communities, assist each other, assist those in need, and care for ourselves. The person-centered, trauma-informed approach, or PCTI, as we like to abbreviate it, it means recognizing that trauma does exist, and it impacts us. And we ought to set up all of our systems and our policies and our ways of doing business, which includes meetings and events and fundraisers and networking events. We ought to set up these systems to avoid re-traumatizing the very people that we're trying to help. The person-centered, trauma-informed approach uses principles such as safety and collaboration, empowerment, voice, and choice. And you'll hear some of those strategies reflected in the tools that our speakers will give you here today. We can use our understanding of trauma and the person-centered, trauma-informed framework in order to address the trauma and the burnout caused by October 7th. We know that both professionals and volunteer lay leaders are hurting. We want to support each other to continue to do the important work that we have to do. And it is our hope that this session provides you with some actionable strategies to do just that. First, a content warning. Some of the topics that we discuss may be hard to deal with. And if you need to leave the room to take care of yourself for any reason, please feel free to do so. And second, I'd like to point out that we are joined by two representatives of the Jewish Social Service Agency here from our local DC area. They're seated in the back. Huron Dixit is a licensed clinical professional counselor and director of learning and inclusion at JESA, and Avi Crichton is an intern with the agency. Huron and Avi, can you wave so everyone knows where you are? If you need to talk to them or want to know about resources that Jewish Social Service Agency has or similar resources that maybe the local Jewish Family Service Agency in your area may have, please feel free to reach out to them during our table breakouts or after the session. That is what they're here for. Over the next several minutes, we'll hear from 3 panelists with experience in helping their clients and their organizations through trauma. Tikva Womack, Tikva, say hi, is a licensed clinical professional counselor from Jewish Community Services in Baltimore. Deborah Grayson Regal is an author, speaker, and CEO of Deborah Grayson Regal Coaching and Consulting. And Heidi Gantwerk is President and Chief Executive Officer of the Jewish Federation of San Diego. Their bios are available in the app for you to read. And following our panelists' discussion, Liz Fisher, hi Liz, JFNA's Chief Talent Officer, will lead us through some interactive conversations around our tables. Then we'll have an opportunity to come together again and ask any questions of our panelists. We hope this session provides you with comfort and context and, importantly, actionable strategies to help yourselves and your colleagues and your communities. Let's begin with Tikva Womack. Tikva, can you please, are you comfortable sitting or do you want to stand? Or?
Can I sit?
Yes,
I need to
of
sit.
course, absolutely. I ask because, ironically, I am much more comfortable standing than sitting, I assure you. So if you see me standing, shifting my weight, that is what will help me. So I invite all of you to be comfortable however that makes you most comfortable. So Tikva, can you please describe your work and what experiences have shaped your knowledge of this topic, and how does trauma impact our behaviors and our reactions, and maybe describe some of the trends that you've noticed in your community following October 7th.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for being here this morning. Thank you, Shelley, Liz, and JFNA for having this very important conversation. So as Shelley mentioned, I am a clinical manager of clinical services at Jewish Community Services in Baltimore, Maryland. And I've been doing trauma and cultural humility work, and specifically my education and background is in expressive arts therapy. So I really bring in a lot of the somatic tools and art into the room when we're talking about trauma and cultural humility and how that impacts our understanding and our experience of trauma, which I'll get to later on. But I think I want to touch on specifically going right into how my experience impacts how I look at trauma and then break down trauma. So before COVID, I would have all of these conversations with my team, and sometimes I would get strange looks like, what do you mean by that? And I probably won't get strange looks today given where we are in the world. And I would be running around, I would be like, okay, we need to get a trainer in or a facilitator in or have some training around how you treat trauma when you're traumatized. So before COVID, I would get, what do you, right? Because the whole understanding was well, you can't treat trauma when you're traumatized. You need to be able to take a step back. You need to, I'm going to say that word that sometimes triggers some of us, self-care. You need to be able to take care of yourself. You can't engage. And we learned through COVID, for those who are health professionals, we don't always have that luxury, right? And I think we're learning it again on another level, especially in the Jewish community, and I really do think globally around 10/7. And so I just want to throw that out there, that we are living that experience and that training around what does it mean to take care of people who might be experiencing trauma while you might also be experiencing trauma, right? And that being a reality. So what is trauma, right? I define trauma a little artsy-fartsy in a way of right, I could give you all of the psychological language, but really my definition of trauma is anything that breaks your meaning. So when you wake up in the morning and you expect to walk life a certain way, and then all of a sudden, boom, something happens that breaks that meaning or that experience of what you expected, that then can become traumatic, right? We're all sitting in chairs. We all expect this chair to support us, or for those of us who are choosing to sit. If that chair were to go out from under us, that might, raise our adrenaline, right? We might have an extreme somatic response. We might start to get nervous, start to sweat. Our neurons are going to fire about what to do while we're also possibly freaking out. We're going to be, look, who saw that? What happened? All of that is going on at the same time. We might even then be a little hypervigilant around, like, if I sit in another chair, is that chair going to go out from under me as well, right? All of that is an experience of trauma. And I like to also tell my clients that there's big T's and there are little T's, right? Big T's are things that I'm sure we could all fill in the blank around what a big T is. October 7th, right, is a big T. And then there are little T's, like fighting with your insurance company. We might not necessarily deem that as traumatic, but it also depends on what was happening and what was that fight about. Was that fight around like a big T car accident and now you're having to advocate how you're going to get your needs met to get to work? Well, that can also be perceived as trauma. And then, of course, there's vicarious trauma when you're watching and you're experiencing through someone else's experience of trauma and you're feeling it yourself. So just a few examples of how and what trauma could be experienced and how it could be experienced. I like to then get people to understand that trauma is not this thing of it could happen to you or it's happened to them. It's really an experience that we're all going to experience at some level. Right, and therefore, really trying to, I have this whole little stand that I like to go on around, what if we had a conversation around the epidemic of trauma? What if we talked about trauma the way we talk about all the other epidemics and acknowledge that at some point we have all experienced some level of trauma and what it means to then process and go through what I call a healing process, not healed from, a healing process, because what we also know about trauma is triggers can exist all around us, and then it restarts that whole cycle again. For example, the chair example that I gave you. I want to make sure, thank you. So I really want, in terms of my trends, right, the trends that I've been seeing. So what I've been seeing when people come in is really being able to just name that, because I think because we have not said and stated on a global level this epidemic of trauma, frequently people will go, well, I just experienced this, but it's not traumatic. And being able to name and normalize what a trauma response is when you're experiencing trauma, and when people go, well, am I crazy, or what's something wrong with me, or sometimes misdiagnosis has happened, such as it's anxiety, or it's this or that, and it's really a trauma response. Getting people to understand what you're having, all of those physiological effects that you're having, that trauma does, is a normal response to an abnormal situation. It is the breaking of meaning, the breaking of what your expectation was for your living. And then how, in that healing process, do we get back to a meaning-making state?
Thank you so much for that framing, Tikva. Deborah, can you please describe the work that you do and what experiences have shaped your knowledge of the topic, and maybe what are some strategies that organizations can use to create a safe and supportive environment for professionals and for lay leaders?
Sure. So I am an executive coach and a workshop facilitator and a speaker. But if you Google me, it'll say writer, which is my least favorite part of my job. So that strikes me as quite ironic. And by way of getting into what I do, I was thinking about 10 years ago when my colleague Marcy Mayer Eisen, who's sitting over there, brought me into St. Louis to do a program on coaching skills for Jewish professionals and Jewish lay leaders. So how could we teach people how to bring coaching skills to the work they do professionally or in their volunteer roles? And we were doing some sort of interactive activity in the group, and one of the lay leaders in the room held up his hand and he said, "Hold on a second. The person in my role play is talking about their emotions. Isn't that for at home? This is work." And I remember first of all thinking, oh my goodness, I wasn't prepared for that. And then thinking how many of us tend to think that emotions are for at home and work is for work. And in fact, in my role as an executive coach, people bring their emotions with them everywhere. Not for nothing, that's why it's called baggage, emotional baggage. We're carrying it with us everywhere. And so I think that probably one of the most important things to have happened as a result of COVID is people realizing that there isn't a firewall between your emotional life and your professional life. And in fact, they coexist, and sometimes they coexist peaceably, but a lot of the times they coexist and they cause challenges for us personally, for us interpersonally, and organizationally as well. And so I would say that probably 80% of my clients are corporations, so Amazon, Google, L'Oreal, Pepsi, companies like that, and about 20% of my clients are federations, JCCs, synagogues, agencies, schools. And one of the things that I find that is the same is that people experience trauma and emotional challenge and mental health challenges the same amount in both sets of organizations. However, in my corporate clients, one of the challenges that I hear more often than I do in my Jewish nonprofit clients are, how do I be compassionate while still holding people accountable for results? Right? That is a very common tension. How do I hold people accountable and still be compassionate? In my Jewish nonprofit clients, that tension is there, but not surprisingly, there's a level of guilt around feeling that way that they express, right? Like, I know that we're a nonprofit organization. I know that people work here because we're supposed to feel like family, and then I think about my family and I'm like, oh God, no, please not that. But we're supposed to feel like family, and I shouldn't be worried about holding people accountable. I should really just be more focused on the compassion aspect of it. And the fact of the matter is whether you're Amazon or Google or a federation or a JCC, you're still a business, and you still need to enable results from people. So one of the things that I often talk about, and I'm typically brought in to work with leaders and managers, so people who have people reporting to them. And I say, a sort of easy way to think about what might activate someone in a way where they're having an emotional response that potentially feels anything from within their control but hard to really out of their control, or what I call the 5 Ps of a challenging topic. And I'm recognizing that I'm having an anxiety response of how am I going to remember 5 Ps in front of 55 people, but let's see if we can do it. So number one is if somebody is wrestling with a topic that feels painful, and one of the most important parts of empathy is it doesn't have to be a topic that's painful to you, it has to be a topic that's painful for them. Number 2 is if they're dealing with something that feels very personal, the sort of personal where they're actually making a call between whether it feels safe to talk about this topic at work. Number 3 is if the thing that they're experiencing feels political. And I'm using the word political with a lowercase p as something that is about differences of opinions in terms of values and allocation of resources, what we mean by political in the informal sense. If they're wrestling with something that feels polarizing, where they recognize that different people could come down on very different sides of this challenge or this issue. And then finally, if they're wrestling with a topic that feels provocative, meaning that they know that it is going to inspire strong feelings and potentially strong actions from other people. And again, if we want to be trauma-informed and person-centered, we need to recognize that if any of those P's are true for me, it doesn't matter if any of those P's are true for you. It is about my lived experience. And so a big part of the work that I do is helping people managers have conversations that involve really good listening, empathy, compassion, while still holding people accountable for results in these situations where people are experiencing any one of these 5 Ps. And Tikva, I love the way that you talked about a small T, a big T, and a vicarious T, and I'm gonna add one more T, which is collective T, right? Collective trauma, which is certainly, I think the reason that we have so many people here in this room is because we experienced a collective trauma on October 7th. I will share with you that my very first experience of collective trauma was 20 some odd years ago when I was working as the Director of Education and Training for the Jewish Federations of North America, when our then Vice President of Financial Resource Development, Vicki Agron, who some of you may know and remember, burst into the building saying, "A plane just hit the towers." And we all gathered to a window and watched the second plane together. And I will tell you that when I think about my experience working at JFNA, I have 2 fundamental memories. Number 1 is how much I absolutely loved my job and the people that I worked with. And number 2 was remembering collectively coming together to watch September 11th unfold around us. And 2 days later, our entire office was transformed into making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, packing gloves, socks, and things for first responders. And that collective response to a collective trauma bonded us together as a team, where those are still people that 20 some odd years later I am deeply connected with.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for sharing that experience, Deborah. I'm sure as we're talking, a lot of us probably have similar memories in our minds of different experiences that we've experienced. Thank you. Heidi, can you please describe your work in your community and the experiences that have shaped your knowledge on the topic? And how have you supported your community before October 7th? And what lessons have carried through to now? What trends have you noticed in your Federation workspace?
So often when you get invited to speak on one of these panels, it's because you have accomplished something, you really have all this great expertise, and I got invited to speak on this panel because of all the trauma we've had in San Diego, so yay. So what I will share with you all is that I am about 3 years into this job, and I'll just share prior to this job, my most basic training is that 35 years ago, I was a psychology major, and we may have talked about this, but I don't actually remember. And then I worked as a facilitator and a coach and engaging in dialogue around the country on very complex emotional public policy issues. And always making room for emotion is what you have to do to get anywhere on these things. I stepped into the role as a consultant. I was working with the organization, and our then CEO, a wonderful, vibrant 44-year-old, was diagnosed with a recurrence of esophageal cancer. He had been on and off sick for some years and spent about a year in and out of the office, very, very ill. They asked me then to step in as interim, and after a few months, he stepped back completely and then ultimately passed away. And the staff was struggling. We were still in COVID, so they had really struggled with leadership because he had been absent or ill for much of the time. Also, they felt guilty for feeling badly about some of the struggles that they were having because they wanted leadership, they craved leadership, but here was this wonderful guy who was ill. When he passed away, I came in. They eventually made me the CEO. We started getting things together. We did a lot of walking the halls, and I just want to acknowledge that I have staff members here who you don't get through this alone, and no leader can manage this without incredible, incredible staff, and so they went through this with me. So I spent a lot of time walking the halls, not doing anything about raising money and not looking at anything other than how were people doing. And I walked into everyone's office and I sat there and we had tissues all over and we just sort of dealt with it, brought in grief counseling. Some of it was great, some of it was atrocious. that was something we could work through as well. And about 6 months into that, as we were really starting to build things were going well in the community, we were coming out of it, our CFO, who had held the place together through Michael's illness and through COVID, dropped dead of a heart attack. And Susan was amazing and beloved, and she also held almost all of the information about the organization in her head. So with our first trauma, we had known that was coming. We were able to sort of cope with the organizational piece of it. The sadness was overwhelming. With this next one, it had incredible trauma, and the day that I made those phone calls, 40 phone calls to our staff, to our board, to tell them about this and the shock, and to go through that, over and over again. But there was also then an organizational chaos that we had to deal with coming out of that. A few months later, I'll just share this with you, our HR person developed cancer and very quickly passed away as well. So that's the first, that's the staffing piece. It was a really tough year. We started talking about burning sage. We started talking about changing the mezuzahs. The rabbi assured us that was proven to be ineffective. But we did a lot of talking. We did a lot of processing. We did a lot of grieving together. We made a lot of space for every single person to be able to share. I will tell you that also some people could not deal with that level of grief, and they did not stay. And that was okay, because there were people who were able to work and who were able to pour themselves into the needs in our community, and that was how they coped. And if you weren't able to keep up with that, it was a hard place to be. I will shift to the now the more collective trauma side of the equation. Throughout this conference, you've been seeing a lot of videos. You've heard speakers, Keith Siegel's, the hostage Keith Siegel, you heard about him. You heard about Netta, who was murdered. All of that took place in our partner community, which is the community of Shar HaNegev. So you've heard about Kfar Aza and Nachal Oz and all of those kibbutzim on the Gaza border. San Diego has partnered with them for 26 years. We have invested in a people-to-people relationship, so it is not a funding fiscal relationship. It is a partnership where we have sent thousands of people there. We have had hundreds of them come to us. A few months before, we had brought 220 people from San Diego to Shar HaNegev. We had had everybody sit in the house of somebody at lunch on the border. We were all sending texts the morning of October 7th, and many of those people were not answering us. So in our partner community, 80 people were killed, 23 were taken hostage, and those were our friends. So it was very, very personal. The mayor of Shar HaNegev, I had stayed in his house many times. He was one of the first people killed. So what I'll share, I know that it's a lot, and it takes me 6 minutes just to get through the trauma that we've had in the past 2 years in San Diego. The same way we worked with staff and built trust and relationships to deal with the trauma in the community you asked prior to October 7th, we had been building relationships among agencies. That is sort of my leadership style, is partnership, collaboration, multi-stakeholder work. We brought 70 Jewish professionals to Israel on that trip with us. We built those relationships so that, in the way that Federation builds the firehouse before the fire, when that happened, we had a relationship of trust, of mutual support. I had that with all of our CEOs in the community, and we were able to grieve collectively, and Federation really became sort of the holder and the curator of that collective grief. And we are, maybe not the most active Jewish community in general, but at every one of our events, we had one October 10th and one recently, we've had over 5,000 people show up from across the community, every segment of the Jewish community, to be together the day after those 6 hostages were murdered. 24 hours, we pulled the community together. We had 1,000 people in person, 2,000 people online, and they now look to us for the space to mourn and to grieve. And the one thing in my style as a leader is I don't hide my own pain. I don't hide my own grief. I've found it impossible to do so. And I, in every engagement with in my emails out to 15,000 people and in my staff huddle Monday morning, I am sharing my own experience and my own emotion in dealing with this, hopefully to model and make it comfortable for others to do the same. So that's where we are.
Thank you so much, Heidi. Wow, 40 phone calls with that news. I just
That was a
cannot
bad
even
day.
imagine how you were able to do that. Thank you. So in this segment of our presentation, I'd like to facilitate a discussion among our panelists, and I invite our panelists to respond to each other as you feel appropriate. And then after that, we'll have a chance for more interaction with our audience. So I'm actually going to start with you, Tikva. Can you describe some strategies that individuals can use to support themselves, and some strategies that organizational leadership can use? And we heard several from Heidi just now. But from your perspective and working with your clients, what can individuals do and what can organizational leadership do to support each other?
Yes, thank you. So I was thinking about this question, and while we were talking and brainstorming as a panel, like, okay, we're going to say strategies and support one another, because I said it earlier and everybody laughed, right? Self-care feels a little bit like a trigger word. And I thought, okay, well, let's talk about that then, because that's what we do when we process trauma, is we go to the place, right? And so if self-care is feeling like a trigger word, then what does that mean in terms of our ability to access self-care? And I'll back up a little bit. In my former life, that doesn't always get like talked about or shown, I was a network engineer for a telecommunication company, of which I mostly, I did some technical work, but I mostly counseled people in their cubicles because I really knew I was a therapist at heart. But we had this thing called DAX. And I don't know if it's because I'm in DC, they talked about this earlier in the panel, that like DC is the place of acronyms, or whether it was Hashem. But DAX, it stands for, in the telecommunication world, direct access to cross-connect systems. And so when I thought about self-care, I thought, what's happening is we're not able to access our ability to care for ourselves. We have to figure out how to find a system or a pathway to get to that place where self-care doesn't feel like so much of a trigger, right? So you ready? DAX. So D, in terms of being able to access our self-care, stands for destimulation. And for some people, this, by the way, this might not apply to everybody. You might say, like, whatever, I don't need this, I'm good with my self-care. But if you're on the other side where maybe not so much, I think this can be helpful. So destimulation can mean different things for different people, right? So if you're like, I need to go access self-care, but I'm going to keep scrolling social media, or I'm going to keep, like, watching whatever I'm watching, even though what I really need is this, or I'm going to just keep going because that's what I know how to do, and you're feeling like, this is my self-care, but for some reason I feel really burned out. Maybe try starting with the de-stimulation, right? That might mean putting the phone down for 5 minutes. That might mean, turning off the TV. That might mean going so far, if you have a toddler and you're a therapist and you're surrounded by everybody, doing one of those like sound, either a sound bath, like I like to call it, or either they have those, I forget what the name of it, when you go in the water and like floating, yes, right, where you're removing as much stimulation as possible. But removing yourself a little bit from the stimulation around you so you can get to the A, which is attunement. And really being able to attune to yourself. What is it that, removing all the external, what is it internally that's happening that you need access to? And maybe it really is a matter of like, oh, I call it buzzing. I'm really buzzing inside, and what I really need is to take a breath. Or I really need some water, or I haven't gone to the bathroom in 5 hours, and that's unacceptable. Now that you have gotten rid of the external stimulation, and now you're attuning to what your body needs or what your mind needs. And then the C is compassion. right? Because sometimes I find with myself even and my clients is we can do the destimulation possibly. We can put the phone down and then we could attune and say what we actually need is to, like an adult did last night on my therapy floor, is to have an adult tantrum, of which I very much encourage in my office. What I really need to do is I need to have an adult tantrum. But that's what little children do, so I'm not going to do that. And what happens if we then access the C, the compassion for giving ourselves what it is that we need in that moment with as minimal shame and judgment as possible, as long as we're not hurting ourselves or hurting somebody else, right? So D, destimulation, right? A, being able to attune. C, being able to have compassion for ourselves. And then you can get to the self-care, the S, right? Which might be the whatever that is for you. Community, right? Making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
Great British baking show.
Exactly,
Yes,
Great
okay.
British Baking Show. I love it. Whatever that is for you. But if you're finding that, because self-care is work. So if you're finding that you're so busy doing the work that you can't do the work to take care of yourself, to get back to doing the work, then that happens. And that's okay. What does that pause, that DAX looks like for you to be able to give back to yourself?
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
leaders.
Yeah.
And everything she said. Being able to model that for yourself, and then to model that for your organization, model your feelings, being able to model your own process so that other people have then the permission to do it for themselves.
Yeah, very important. Thank you. So Deborah, as a leadership coach, what kind of training should managers or individual contributors receive or seek out in order to get better at working in trauma-informed spaces? And what should managers do if they're concerned about an employee or about a volunteer?
Yeah. So let me start with they should definitely learn DAX, right? I'll just give a shout out to that. I love that model as well. So I use the word training because it's sort of like the idea of, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and my job is going into organizations and helping with training. And I think that teaching, it's a combination of teaching, training, coaching, consulting, advising, therapy, like a whole bunch of different modalities that need to be considered as part of the package of interventions that a leader uses, a manager uses, and that even individual contributors can use. So when I think about sort of three big building blocks of what has been helpful since COVID and then again since October 7th in helping leaders and teams work through individual and collective little t and big T trauma, it tends to fall into three buckets. So the very first one that I would call a leading with emotional intelligence. And when you think about leading with emotional intelligence, the very first building block of emotional intelligence is self-awareness, right? So the very first thing that we all need to be able to do is to recognize ourselves, our own emotions, our own activations, our own traumas. That is the very first thing you can do before you can help another person, is to develop your own self-awareness. And for leaders who are incredibly busy and incredibly overwhelmed, often trying to help everybody else and do the work of their community, just even taking a moment for self-awareness may feel like a pretty big stretch, but it's incredibly important for you to check in with yourselves. One of the best tools comes from Mark Brackett from the Center for Emotional Intelligence at Yale, and also I've heard this from Danny Siegel as well, which is the idea of name it to tame it, right? The idea of if you can actually name your emotions, you can take down some of the heat in your emotions. I think every leader should have an emotions wheel in their office, and I think every parent or partner should have an emotions wheel on their fridge, so the people living in their house can say, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed, which of course is heartbreaking. So when you think about emotional intelligence, it's self-awareness and then it's self-management. Okay, now that I'm recognizing that I'm experiencing some challenging emotions or I've had a tough experience, now I have to figure out what are the tools that I have to manage myself, recognizing that if I can't manage myself, I can't manage other people. And then there is other awareness of, oh, there's a person over there who is having an experience, and that that experience may be totally different from mine. I want to have empathy about the fact that the thing that activated them has absolutely nothing to do with me, but that's absolutely fine. So awareness of other people's mindsets, behaviors, and emotions, and then other management, which is recognizing the impact that your behaviors have on other people. And so if you have experienced trauma yourself, or you just want to be more person-centered, trauma-aware, trauma-informed, recognizing that you are in relationship with other people and how you feel and how you behave has both an intended impact and an unintended impact, and we want to be really mindful of those unintended impacts. So emotional intelligence is one bucket. A second bucket would be creating a culture or a climate of trust. And a culture of trust, right, if we think of culture as the way we do things around here, I think of a climate as the way I do things around me. And not everybody is going to have, the opportunity to have somebody who is so committed to changing the culture of an organization, but everybody can change their climate, which is the way I do things around me. And so I'll just sort of pull on, as we think about creating a culture or climate of trust, my work is really rooted in the work of Frances Fry and Ann Morris out of Harvard University, and they talk about the trust triangle, which is that everyone in an organization needs to be strong in 3 areas. Number 1 is rigor, so your logic. People believe that you have put logic into your thinking, but the other two are really related to the work we're doing here today, which is authenticity. I am who I say I am. You believe, right? I often say to people when I'm doing a training session, if you invite me out for coffee, which is code for invite me out for ice cream, please. If you invite me out, the Deb that you saw presenting on stage is the same Deb that you're going to get having a scoop of ice cream. Like, I don't have a different Deb, which also means I don't have a quieter Deb, which is really unfortunate for the people who live in my house. I just don't get quieter. I'm not allowed to have a microphone at home. And so authenticity, and then the third one is empathy. Do people believe that you are there for them and in service of them, not just of yourself? And every single one of us has a wobble in that trust triangle, and most of the leaders that I coach, when they have a wobble, the wobble is empathy, right? That at a certain point, they just have compassion or empathy fatigue, but it starts to undermine the trust in the relationship. And then the third building block, the thing that I'll just wrap up with today, is around being able to navigate tricky conversations. And that includes being able to have difficult conversations about mental health and mental well-being, about trauma in the workplace, about how people are feeling and doing, and that all-important conversation about how do we treat people with compassion while still holding them accountable for results.
Thank you very much. Heidi, can you talk a little bit about how you support all staff and volunteers, knowing that not all people who work in Jewish organizations or who volunteer for Jewish organizations are Jewish. We have all sorts of people who come from all sorts of backgrounds. How do you create the kind of safe, person-centered, trauma-informed environment for everyone? And at the same time, how do the strategies that you've employed address burnout within your communities?
So first of all, the trauma that we've experienced in terms of some of the tragedies that we had, it had nothing to do with anything having to do with Jewish peoplehood or anything Jewish, right? We had 3 people that people loved pass away. 2 of them were not Jewish. It was a very interesting process of thinking, what does Jewish mourning look like? And explaining what Shiv is, and explaining about all the processes of Jewish mourning and how we do that collectively. And that was a wonderful teaching opportunity. And I think those of us who have experienced this is one thing we do pretty well. And it's one thing we have amazing systems and processes, and we bring deep meaning to mourning. So that was very helpful. It actually gave me a structure to help bring everybody into that process, and to bring the non-Jews and their families and other people in the community in. And when it came to October 7th, again, because of this partnership, and I think this is a blessing for us, this was not something that happened to Israel, which is a country nobody was familiar with, or, those people had been in our office many times. We knew them. We had hosted them for lunch, for dinner. It was incredibly personal. So truly, there was very little distinction in my office between Jews and non-Jews, and we really are a family. I mean, we really have become a family. So that's one thing. I think in the community, the way I have approached the last year, and I know that it has exhausted some of my staff, and I keep going back, we always keep going back to Lord Jonathan Sacks, and he wrote about the difference between optimism and hope. And he said that optimism is a feeling, but hope is an action. And I live by that every day. So for me, the way to find hope out of the tragedy is by doing, and by feeling that we are making a difference. And I think for my staff, and that's for everybody, and I stress this in every meeting, if you are working in the finance department processing pledges and you never come out of that office, you are still part of the action that is creating hope, not just for our community, but for the global Jewish people. And that is an amazing thing to be doing right now. We talk about that a lot. I reached out to the entire community at a point where I was just feeling completely miserable and sort of spent and broken. And I wrote about this, and I asked both the leadership in Shar HaNegev, and I asked my own community. I asked 15,000 people, which, by the way, they answer when you ask them questions, what had given them hope, because it was a very dark time. And I got back so many responses. People sent me music. People sent me videos of their children blowing shofar. People sent me poems. They sent me essays. They wrote from their hearts, and then I was able to share that with my staff, share it back out to the community. Those kinds of things make me feel like I'm doing something, and I share the story with the panel. I keep coming back to this self-care, and my staff laughs at me every time I say it because they know I break out in hives when anyone asks me what I'm doing. And we were in Israel in April with Tali Lebanon. Some of you may have met her. She is the director of the Israel Trauma Coalition. She's a force. And if you think about somebody with a hard job right now, we were meeting with Tali, and one of the women in my group who runs our senior center, who's just the most empathic, caring, lovely person, looked at her and just leaned in and said, I just want to know, what are you doing for self-care? And Tali sort of leaned back, turned to her and said, when people ask me that, I really just want to punch them in the face. And that has become my mantra, because I find it works for me. But I mean, for me and for many of my team, they find hope and they find the strength to go on by doing. And we have done so much. And so I, in some ways this year, which has been, the hardest 3 years of my life professionally, has also been by far the most rewarding. And I come to work, and I think many of us do every day, feeling so incredibly lucky. Like so lucky to be in this space, to be doing work that matters this much. I didn't sleep for 4 months. I couldn't go to a party. I came home from Israel, the first trip. This was in November, after October 7th, and I was supposed to go to my husband's holiday party that night. We were ready. I promised him I would go because I had not been present for a month. I hadn't spoken to him. And I got home and we had a conversation. I shared a little bit about my trip, and then I said, okay, I'm gonna go get ready for the party. He said, no, I texted them, you're not coming. I said, why not? He said, I don't think going to my holiday party and having a conversation about, casually about all the sexual violence you witnessed when you were in Shar HaNegev is great for the holidays right now. He said, I actually would prefer that you don't go. So having a partner, having friends, having other CEOs who you talk to, and my last piece is, the other thing is, if you are a lay leader, if you are working with professionals in your community, I bring in all of the CEOs, and we just sit there, and you know how you have a check-in and it's 2 minutes? Our check-ins are an hour and a half, because no one is okay. No one is okay. And they may say they're okay for 5 minutes. None of us are okay. You can see my emotion right now. None of us are okay in this space right now. And so allowing for that, for every agency head to come into my office once a month and spend an hour and a half telling us, and understanding that we're all responding to the craziness in our community because people who are coming from a place of fear and anger, which is where the Jewish people are right now, are coming at you with their own anger. And they are layering onto you as a leader all of the things you're doing wrong, and it's not because you're doing anything wrong. It's because they are looking for control in a situation where the meaning has been lost, as you said, where they don't have control of the chair anymore. And so we are finding the need to support each other as leaders in the face of all of that grief, all of that anger, and it is misdirected and it comes our way on a daily basis. And so spend the money to support your leaders, spend the money to support your staffs, buy them lunch. If you're the board, take them out, get them bonuses, do whatever it takes. Invest now, and it will pay off later for your organization.
Yeah. Can I add?
Yep.
I also wanted to add, and I would be remiss, you bring up so beautifully two pieces too that also are really important when we talk about self-care, is that communal, and I'm going to add accountability, right? When you talk about putting the two together around we think about like the outcome or the product, like you said, in terms of a product, but also too in terms of what it is that you need, right? And if you're not sure, having that community or that partner to be able to hold you accountable in that process to get you to that piece. Because I really do believe like we're able to access intuitively what we need, but because of whatever we're doing and all the things, we can't get there. So having a partner or a community to hold you to that practice is so vital. So thank you for bringing that in. And I would be so remiss as a therapist sitting here to not say, please use your resources. Please use your resources. I know that many of us in this room are the resource, and we also deserve the resource. We also deserve the therapist, the EAP, the coaching, the whoever it is to be able to fill it back in. So I find myself saying this to a lot of people who really hit that wall, that barrier, they struggle with that. Like, would you tell that to your best friend? Would you tell that to your best friend that they don't have time to go to therapy, or they don't have time to take care of them? You wouldn't, right? So please use your resources. And if it's not the right fit, try another resource on, right? Keep shopping for the right shoe.
And I have two things I want to say. Number one is I thank you for talking about hope and optimism. I found a quote that I keep in my phone about hope that I want to just share very briefly. I heard you say, I know that you all are the resource, and I want to offer another potential strategy, which is to back yourself out of being the resource and being the bridge to resources. A lot of the times when I'm talking to people, leaders, and managers, they feel like they are supposed to be the resource for somebody who is having a mental health challenge, experiencing, a trauma response. And my answer is actually that isn't your role. Your role is to know what resources are available and be a bridge to resources, but actually not to be the resource yourself. So if you think about what a lifeguard does, right? A lifeguard is somebody who keeps their eye out for potential danger. When they see something, they say something early before somebody goes under. They don't let somebody who's going under pull somebody else under as well, but then they call in the EMTs, right? And say, you know what, we have something that needs to get looked at. So I'm going to say, wherever possible, back yourself out of being the resource unless it is your job to be the resource and be the bridge to resources. And if I may, I just want to share this quote about hope that I have shared. I'll email it to you if you want it. You won't be able to write it down fast enough for how quickly I need to speak. But this is from Paula Davis, who is the founder of the Stress and Resilience Institute. And she says, hopeful people share 4 core beliefs. 1, that their future will be better than their present. Number 2, that they have the power to direct how their lives unfold. Number 3, that there are many paths to their goals. And number 4, that there will be obstacles and they can overcome them. So that has helped me through many a dark moment.
Can I share one quote also? When I wrote that email asking for hope and what gives people hope, I just want to share one quote that I think encapsulates a lot of this. The youth director in Shar HaNegev, and if you think about the trauma in Shar HaNegev, the young people in Shar HaNegev are unbelievably traumatized and they are struggling in every way. So this woman wrote me 4 pages back. She wrote me the most extraordinary essay, and I pulled this one piece, and this was right around the high holidays, and I shared this with my staff, and I've shared it with a couple of other people. So she wrote, "The battle is internal. To wake up every morning and search for that moment in the day that reminds you of the essence, the why. The moment that conquers the sadness that wells up and the immense frustration when facing forces greater than us. The second thing is to always surround yourself with good people, ego-free, filled with faith, to maintain authentic and honest dialogue and to strengthen one another, to work with friends, to work within the community, all the things we always said to ourselves might not be good, to amplify the forces of light, to amplify the forces of faith in humanity, to amplify the positive forces, to overcome the darkness. And that doesn't mean I'm writing this without crying. This year, like every year on Yom Kippur, I forgive myself. I am filled with compassion for myself. I've done everything I can, and I am doing everything I can, and I forgive myself for what I cannot do."
I will clap for that quote. Thank you. What a compassionate and hopeful note to end this part of our conversation on. Thank you so much for sharing. Speaking of resources, I'm glad we talked about resources. I will point out again, Kiran and Avi, who are here from JESA, they are resources for you. We also have additional resources here on the handouts that are on your tables. You'll see on one side is the wheel, we call it, the person-centered trauma-informed concepts laid out on a wheel. And if you can imagine, that wheel is designed to spin. It's a two-dimensional paper, but not everything lines up perfectly, so you can imagine some of the different person-centered concepts matching up and lining up with the trauma-informed concepts. And then on the reverse of that page are additional articles, resources, contact information. Feel free to reach out to any of us following today's panel. There are 2 questions in the audience. We're going to go into table breakouts. If you want, we will have time. Are your questions for the panelists? Okay. So let's hold those questions, write them down so you don't forget them. We're going to do table breakouts. And then after that, we'll have an opportunity for you to ask questions of our panelists. I'm going to turn it over to Liz now to lead our breakouts.
Hi, everyone. So I know that some of you are frustrated that we can't go straight to your questions. Please write them down. I want to tell you why we're doing it intentionally. We want to also here model this kind of person-centered, trauma-informed meetings. And we know that you've just been listening to a lot, and we want to give people space in smaller groups just to take a breath for a second. So I promise we're going to get to your questions. And I want to hug all these people, and I'm lucky because I'm going to be able to do it. We're just going to give you a few minutes at your tables to do 2 things. Number 1, and you can do this as a group, or you can just turn to the person next to you. What resonated for you here, right? Are there things that you heard that really resonated for you? And number 2, are there strategies that you have used that have been helpful? And I want to say something particularly to the volunteer leaders in this room. I know, because I talk with so many of you, that you think about people like me and Heidi and Tikva, who do this all day long, and Deb in a different kind of way, but we do this all day long every day. But I want to go back to this idea of trauma being the chair falling out under you. All of us have felt that. I know so many of you have been on the ground in Israel. I know so many of you have hosted hostage families in your communities. All of us have seen the onslaught from media. So just take a moment to think about actually for yourself, right? This isn't just about sort of all of the people we care about overseas, but what resonates with you personally, and are there things that have been effective for you? We're going to take probably, because there's a lot of questions, 5-7 minutes, just to take a minute, and then we will get to your questions. So if you'd like to write them down so you don't forget, please do so. Thanks.
Well, that mic's on. Okay.
I think you turned us off.
I just want to cry.
We were going to group hug it.
I know.
I know.
And I was going to literally knock you in the back, and we would have had a real trauma here.
Thank you.
I also want to thank you for you. This was so nice.
Yeah.
I know your story so well, but in steps, and when I hear you tell it, I'm I can't.
But and the thing I didn't say it, we're amazing now. we're so great.
We're so resilient.
We're so, yeah, and we're doing,
Maybe too resilient,
we're like, yeah.
But that really is a thing. I mean, not like we should uplift the resilience, and we can get to a place of truly being too resilient, where like, yeah, it becomes something that we wear.
But I look at my staff, and I mean, we've doubled our staff in 3 years, but there are so few people that have been here. You know, it was too much for a lot of people. It really was. They just couldn't take it. I mean,
It'd be hard for you to like work at 25 Broadway
Oh
or wherever
my
you work.
gosh,
And, like,
yeah.
It's just hard. So,
yeah,
I'm way too constantly.
No, that's a lot.
Yeah. She like holds it all together all the time.
exactly.
Carly in the green sweater, she is my COO, and she's been there longer than anybody in the office.
Oh, wow.
She's 35. She's been there 13 years, and she's amazing. And I mean, she has been a partner for me. I mean, she wasn't my COO. She was like, I have just because she is the
she's doing it.
strength. She is, but every once in a while, you can the accumulation of what she has been through. And I said to her this morning, you really can go someplace.
Yeah,
You
right.
really
You've
do
heard this.
not have to do
Right.
this.
You could do this speech.
She said, no, I'll be fine. And I said,
Well, there's something too about like hearing your story outside of yourself that feels like sometimes it could be re-traumatizing, but on the other side it could be
Cathartic.
like it's cathartic.
Yeah.
So she
yes.
seems like she knows what she needs.
And that's a gift in and of itself, right?
is.
Somebody who knows and can advocate
Well, she told me
for
what
they
she
need.
needs this week is Taylor Swift tickets in Toronto
There
on
you
Friday, but
go.
that's not happening.
Wait, that's an option?
No.
Don't all speakers get that?
Yeah.
We get little battery packs.
I
That's what
feel
they do.
like between everybody at this conference, we could set up a little table and do a
Yes.
little like donation.
No kidding.
Taylor Swift, we just need $1 from each person that walks by. We get there eventually.
No, we would not get there. We need $2 from each person.
Right, this Friday.
Right.
I forgot you said
Yes.
it's this Friday.
You exhausted, Liz?
I'm pretty tired.
Yeah. See, this morning was tough.
I'm pretty tired, and I don't know if I was saying, like, and we were at the board meeting yesterday morning, so we 7 o'clock in the morning meeting.
Which is basically 4 o'clock for me, so just saying.
Oh,
Just saying.
And it takes me a long time to, like, wind down. Like, even if I'm exhausted, if I don't get to my room until, 11 or 12, it's not like I fall asleep.
No.
yeah.
Yeah, no, it's
A
been.
little bit, like,
What do you have the rest of the week? Do you get to have some time off or time home?
well, I'm going home today.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, I don't even know, but I actually have a bunch of, like, friend things, which are going to be really
Lovely.
nice. I know.
Lovely.
I haven't even really thought about the rest of the week. I know I'm like, this is last Tuesday. I did have some ideas that I was going to get worked on the train this afternoon.
Yes.
That's all I was thinking. Like, good.
I'll be the one working on the train this afternoon. But
We have our annual gala this Saturday.
oh my gosh.
And FIDF had theirs this weekend, and protesters blocked the entrance. We had to bring our security director in. If they had to delay the whole program by an hour, people were. So now I'm just waiting to see what happens for us this week. It was awful.
Oh,
It's just awful.
that sounds
Meanwhile, we have
really
100 kids from
stressful.
Shaharnegev in San Diego right now. Oh, and speaking of trauma, these kids went to Balboa Park, and there were 17 kids from this group that didn't make the first screening because they were psychologically not ready.
Yeah.
And then the parents complained, and the parents were just wrong. The kids weren't ready for this, and they came anyway, and they went to Balboa Park, and they first saw the House of Palestine and started throwing things at it and trying to steal things. And then they saw a big Muslim family outside the park and started shouting Allahu Akbar, and like, oh my God, it was like total
And you said the
nightmare.
parents said they were ready and insisted on it? Or?
Because the parents probably needed it.
The parents
They sent
were just
their kids
mad
to
because
it.
their kids weren't getting the opportunity, and the education department failed. And I brought in all the teachers because I said, look, I said, this is not the kids' fault. This is your fault. You put them at risk. You put them in a situation you knew they couldn't handle. And they were going to Disneyland the next day. I said, those kids, they can't be in Disneyland. They said, they'll be so upset. I said, I'll be upset if the nightly news has a group of Israeli teens, from like you're in danger. It was crazy.
Also, Disneyland is like loud and crowded and the flashing lights.
And very
very
stimulating.
I know.
Crashing noises.
Right. So some of them we set up safe spaces everywhere in Disneyland. No one was allowed to be without a chaperone. But then the other thing they let them do is go out and get absolutely plastered. And I'm like, so we had a little
Because they are kids.
Right.
They are, but I learned a new word. I learned crossfaded. Do you know this word? Crossed? Well, you don't. Yours is. So that means when you drink and smoke so much. And I had to learn this when they were all saying, a lot of kids were crossed this weekend. So I called my 24-year-old. I said, can you please explain this? He's like, Mom.
Most family teens took them out, or they went out on their own?
The parents, it's the like,
I'm traumatized here.
no, the parents. It's the day
This is
school
not
that
okay.
where I was born here. It's all these wealthy. I'm not
Right, they
like
probably
it's.
thought they were letting these kids have a release or whatever.
And what they say is it's safer for them to drink at my estate.
At my estate, at my vineyard.
Right. So they buy it, and I said, guess what we're doing? We are scheduling every second of their next weekend. So I'm like, how much is Dave and Buster's to rent it out for 48 hours? Great, done. But I mean, I'm like, kids drink, yes, but traumatized kids in another country get.
I need to do a quick time check. How are we doing on time?
Crossfading.
That's a whole nother level of
Right, because
right.
the paranoia and the anger and
Right.
this is I was.
This
I was
session
not
ends at
prepared.
10:15.
Okay,
And they had
I'm going to ask
psychologists there,
you
haven't
to
they?
wrap up your conversations. I hope you've met someone that you can
Every day brings
continue
something new and
conversation
exciting.
with.
I know.
I'm so intrigued. in many
We've
levels.
learned our lesson from yesterday. We really want to start the plenary on time because we really want to get everybody their transportation on time. So we're going to take questions, and thank you. I'm not going to ask you to report back from your tables, but thank you for taking that time with each other. And now, do you have questions for Shelley or Vander panelists? We're going to start over here with Karen, and then we're going to go right to this person at table 3.
Ari, thank you so much. And I'm happy we had this table conversation first because we discussed our question. I'm Karen Barral. I'm the Vice President of Government Relations at the Jewish Federations of North America. And I was listening to this conversation, and we were talking about it here. The first example we have of burnout and needing self-care is the opening of Bereshit. We just had Rosh Hashanah, where God created the world in 6 days and then rested on the 7th day. And I'm sure he was totally exhausted. So the idea of Shabbat in any form or any way that you want to do it is really a gift that we are given. It's a resource to recharge. And all of these things, we actually pray that God find favor in our rest. And it doesn't matter what that rest looks like, but that's it. And I will tell you, JFNA has a rule in our handbook that you are not allowed to work on Shabbat or on religious holidays. And I'm observant, and my staff, and Deborah can vouch for that because her son Jacob works for us. We do not ever send no texts, no emails, no nothing. And I don't know if other people are observant, I don't ask. But I have been told that is the biggest gift that I've given. One of the biggest benefits of working for JFNA is that for those 25 hours, they know there's no deliverables, there's no texting, there's nothing that's going to happen, and you get to recharge. And I know, and Stephanie was going to say, this is not the only thing. There's other things. We all need vacations. We need to check out, but it is such an important tool that no matter what your religious level is, I really encourage you to have those 25 hours of just being off and do whatever you need to do. Take a nap, go to the move, whatever you want to do, but it's so important, and it's there for us. We're Jewish, and that's written for us to do that, and that model in that roadmap is kind of a secret to a great life.
Thank you, Karen. We're going to come back. I just know there's a lot of questions. I will say some of you probably sit on the Jewish Federations of North America board, and one of the things I said not so long ago to our board members is one of the many, many, many things that has happened post October 7th, because October 7th was during a holiday, many of us for the first time in our sort of working lives had emergency meetings at a time we wouldn't, and I think we've forgotten that we didn't used to do that, and I think we can get back to it. I really do. Okay, we're just going to go here, then here. Okay. I have terrible eyes, so I apologize, but this is Ari from Rockland County.
Thank you so much. Short preamble and then a question. First is that, I've discovered over the past year that we may feel isolated and alone, but we're not. And we have colleagues and we have resources, and I've availed myself of them because, things go in a bad direction if you don't. And I also realize that we need to grasp at good things and smachot when we can. And so I just wanted to wish a mazel tov to our colleague Stephanie on her upcoming wedding. So that's number one.
I'm going to take my self-care 4 days off.
But here's my question. In the first stage of the discussion, all of you described different kinds of trauma and how we deal with them. There is another one which you didn't discuss, which impacts here, and that is generational trauma.
Thank you.
Yes. And I'll tell you how that dovetails in with another element of this discussion, which is really the basis of my question. One thing in talking with my counselor that came out is that we collectively are carrying the anger and the sadness and the confusion and the helplessness of our entire community every day, especially at the outset of this crisis. And that's a very heavy burden. When you combine that with generational trauma, and I can think of a Holocaust survivor who has spoken at many of our programs, who was speaking at a program for us last December, a Hanukkah program with our women's philanthropy group. And she just broke down because even though she is the most strong, resilient woman, one of them that I've ever met, and you all are, by the way, she, more than almost any, she was breaking down. And this was ours to carry. This generational trauma and this angst in the community. I'm wondering if you have some guidance, some help, some advice on how that integrates into what we do and how we can address it.
Yeah.
So at Shelley's very smart suggestion, we're just going to take a couple questions, and then we're going to open up to the panel. So generational trauma, my guess is you're not going to forget that was a question, but it also gives you a moment to take a breath and think about it. I'm going to do one or two more, and then we're going to open up to the panel. Okay, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jackie Sprincis Wong. I've been in Federation probably since 1999, I don't know, really a long time. How do I, when I come to the General Assembly, the Lion Conference, all the missions, all the things I've seen, how do you then wrap it in a nice package that it can go back to the community? Because most of the time I'm a lunatic. I get back there and I just, from the trauma, from seeing so much information, I just want to tell everybody, they can't handle it. I don't know how to do it or present it in a much easier way so that I'm okay and they can hear me.
Thank you for that question. Okay, I'm going to take one more from the back of the room, and then we'll go to the panel. And I'm trying to, I'm taking my orders from Shelley. Okay, two more. One here, one there, and then I'm going to be in trouble with Shelley, and that will be traumatic for me. So, small T trauma.
Hi, my name is Alexis Myers. I'm from Boston, and I have a question about how do you make it not feel like a Band-Aid when addressing the trauma that is going on for staff and everything, and it's continuous, right? We talked a lot about how it's just one thing after another, and we're diving into our work, but when resources are offered, how do we make it feel continual, authentic, and not just like we're slapping a Band-Aid on it and right back to meetings? So if we could talk about that, that'd be great.
Okay, so how do we make it not feel like a Band-Aid? How do we sort of retell these stories in a way that's not re-traumatizing to ourselves and others? What do we have to say about generational trauma? And since that's not complicated enough, we're going to take one more question, and then we're going to let you sort of figure it out. Okay, but Shelley, what do you want me to do? Because, okay, very quick.
Hi. This is traumatizing. I'm feeling traumatized.
Deep breaths.
Hi, my name is Zoe. I manage UJ's social media, so that's not fun. It is a lot of trauma. I will say it's great and all of this advice. But my question is, I'm 28, I live in New York City, I have 3 roommates. I work an incredibly high stress job that contacts me all hours of the day. I can't afford a therapist, nor can my insurance cover one without me having to go through the extremely stressful and complicated process of processing super bills. Can't take vacation, can't afford vacation. What do you do then? What do the younger generation do? We've been experiencing trauma since we were born.
Okay. One, and then Stephanie, because of her upcoming Simcha, is going to get the last word.
Hi, I'm Ambassador Larlyn Riverwind from the Georgia Tribe of Eastern Cherokee, and my husband and I represent Firekeepers International, dedicated to your people and advocacy, resiliency, and recovery. We're in the process of developing a recovery assistance program, and we would like to hear from you, the professionals. Would you like something that's by Jewish people, for Jewish people, or would you like for us to pull from the, as Indigenous people, from the genetic and historical generational trauma from our own community of Native resources and psychologists and therapists? What would be, how can we best, like what angle or how should we do this?
Mine is maybe an add-on to Zoe's is, and it was mentioned earlier, this idea of self-care, and I don't remember which one of you said, if you can't take the time, then you can't take the time. Like, isn't that the problem, right? Is that we're in constant, I was saying before at our table, like, we literally, after October 7th, we ran a sprint, and then we went right into a marathon. And then every time Iran threatens, like, to bomb, that's another sprint. Sometimes it lasts a couple of days, sometimes it lasts a week. And we've been on this, like, this cycle with, frankly, no end in sight. And, like, how do we make sure that we take that time and help others take that time?
Okay, so I'm going to give our panelists a moment to respond. I'm going to also give them permission to not answer all of these questions because I think that it might be very hard to answer all of these questions. And I want to let you all know that there are resources. We're putting resources in the app, and we'll put more. And they all pre-told us that they're going to share their information. So maybe if the 3 of you just want to sort of share a closing word and potentially a response to a question. And if they have time, they'll stick around for a few moments. And if not, you can get in touch with them or with us. And I will just put in a very large plug for my colleague Shelley and their team. They do extraordinary training about this. And so I think there are lots of resources also at JFNA.
Okay.
Give it a try.
Go team. Wow. All right, we can do this. I'm just gonna name because that's how I process. I'm gonna take generational trauma and then what we do now and then resources. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. All right.
Yes.
And then okay.
Awesome.
I was like 6 minutes trauma. Okay. Ooh, how does that happen? Even now answering the questions. And this is what I love about being in the room and doing collective work and coming to spaces like this, because then this is going to be a twofer, because then we share brains, We share resources and we share collective responses. So that means when I have 6 minutes and I'm like, all right, my partners over here got me in speaking about collective trauma because I don't have to cover, and then someone in the audience speaks about generational trauma. This is something someone mentioned about feeling isolated and abandoned. This is something that not like just I'm holding or you're holding, but we're all holding and we're all bringing into the room. I also want to name, in terms of work with Holocaust survivors, they are the most beautiful gift that we could have ever received in intergenerational trauma work. Because we have learned from our ancestors that it does not impact us today and future generations. It actually even alters our DNA because it is encoded in us and changes how we show, because we've had to adapt, right? Again, we are having normal responses to an abnormal situation, and therefore our DNA codes change, and therefore we adapt, which is why we're still here. Right? Because we've learned how to do that. So what do we do with that generational trauma? We deal with it, right? That means when we go in and we do the work, we're not just doing the work for what's happening now. It goes, and this is why I say that's the cultural humility practice. We're carrying all of that in when we do that meaning-making process about what does that not just mean for us, but also backwards and forwards. And I know that's a more abstract answer, but bringing it into the room, bringing it into the conversation, and acknowledging that, like, yes, this is not something that has not just happened with me, but has happened before me. And therefore, yes, we do need resources from, it's a both and, as we like to say in the therapy world. It's not just getting resources from within our community, but it's learning collectively, because we're not free unless we're all free. And so we really need to be able to say, hey, what happened over here, right? What did they do here? It's gonna be that collective work that then gets us to a place of being able to elevate whatever resources and shared tools are out there, which then gives us opportunity to develop shared resources and tools that are out of, I'm going to use the C word, that might be a trigger for some people, that are out of some of our capitalist systems, right? So then there is, for example, we do have 988. If people are not familiar with 988, it's a national hotline that is free. You can call it at any time. They are professional workers who are trained and will be able to support you, and a good resource. But I know that's not just enough. And so I do know in different, I'm from Baltimore, so I don't know what's available, but it's New York, right? Like, I can only imagine if they have it in Baltimore, they for sure have it in New York, of counselors who donate their time and have nonprofit available. But what I will also say is, if you're feeling like this in your organization, you're probably not the only one. Yeah. So what does it mean to collectively come together and bring this and say, like, we want to continue to do the work, we're passionate about the work, we're here, we're present, we're on the front lines, and we need more. And we need, for example, one of the things my organization did over the last few years is, I know it's just a day, but they gave a personal self-care day and was like, this is not on you, this is on us, it's for you to use it whenever you want to use it at your discretion, right? It's gonna be those moments, because it's a marathon, even though it feels like the sprints. It's going to be forcing ourselves and forcing our community and collective to take the pause, to keep going, because it is a generational thing, and we do need to take the pauses and take care of ourselves to be able to continue the legacy. I hope that answered some of it.
Summarizing thoughts. Thank you.
I don't know. I mean, I'm just looking at the room and sensing that the summarizing thought is there's a next session. I mean, look, I would like to just offer up conversations with people, because every situation is unique. Every individual has a different response to trauma. And I think when we talk about person-centered and trauma-informed, that means there is no one response that is going to solve these problems. And you need to be aware of your staff. You need to work with your supervisors. As lay leaders, you need to invest I think about what kind of health insurance that we get for our team and what we invest. There's so many ways to sort of put money into this to not make it a Band-Aid, and it's a culture change in an organization, and it's a culture change in a community. And if you're not prepared to do that work, then it's always going to feel like a Band-Aid. It's always going to feel performative. And you have to just change how you engage on a daily basis for it not to feel performative. And they'll know, people know. If you're not authentic, they know.
And I would just put in a call for chesed, loving kindness, right? If there were ever a call for loving kindness, this is the moment. And that doesn't just mean treating those you work with and live with loving kindness, but you have to start with yourself. Because if you are mean to you, it's going to leak out into others. So please treat yourself with loving kindness. And what I have found is when I try to tell myself to be more, to be kinder to myself and more compassionate to myself, it doesn't always work. But if I tell myself to be more generous with myself, that's a framing that does work, because I'm a pretty generous person, and I could figure out how to be generous with me.
Yeah, I want to, if I could add one last thing. I love what you said, and that reminds me about the chesed, loving kindness, of what you offer to us in our Jewish values. And I think that if we could really also to use that as a framing, that regardless of observance, there is so much in our Jewish values around Shabbat, sacred rest, around chesed, that it really is a model and a template to be able to generationally, right? That's what we have learned also too from our ancestors, is generationally leaning into those values and using them as resources and tools to make it through, because that's what they use. And
one other really quick, this is such a little thing, but you all have amazing lay leaders and donors in your community, and a lot of them are therapists and mental health professionals and specialists, and we have brought them in, and they have donated their time, right? I'm just thinking about your concern about how you find people. I have an amazing trauma specialist who's on my board who has donated countless hours to staff and to executives in my community. There are right now other ways to engage the Jewish community in providing some of these resources when the systems are just set up to make it impossible. Just impossible. So I feel for you.
Thank you to our amazing panelists and this audience. Thank you. You can see we have such a great need for this conversation. Our plenary starts in 5 minutes, maybe even 4 by now. Sheryl Sandberg is speaking. Barry Weiss is speaking. Please head directly to the plenary, and thank you again.
Who was the first? Erin, did they say?